Chapter 10.
I don't feel so good.
Maud moaned like an old cow.
I swear I'm dying. Oh my God.
He rolled from one side of his bunk bed to the other, comforting his stomach like a poor man's sorry.
Oh, shush! Try to sleep, will you?
Basil scolded.
Don't think about it. You shouldn't have drunk like an old sod anyway.
Don't talk about it. I beg you.
Maud whined.
I don't even think it's the bloody plonk.
To be fair to Maud, the Adriatic had hit some bad weather, cutting through rough seas and raging winds somewhere in the middle of the Indian Ocean. The captain had given a warning a couple hours prior that a cold front was moving toward them, and that extreme squalls of more than 50 knots would be the result of it. Even Basil, admittedly, was feeling a little queasy too. For hours upon hours, the ship sharply climbed up into the salty, warm air for what seemed like an eternity, only to then plummet and smash down into the deep, angry swell, slicing through the tropical Indian water like blades.
I think I need a nurse.
Maud complained.
You should have asked one of your lady friends to come and save you.
Basil chuckled, snugging his head into his pillow.
No doubt they'd come to your rescue.
Basil's last words fell on deaf ears. There was a sudden scuffle in the darkness of the cabin, and Basil glimpsed a black silhouette making a dash for the bathroom. He listened to the horrible sounds of Maud heaving in the toilet.
Oh no.
Immediately thereafter, the ship veered down at such a sharp angle that Basil almost rolled off his bunk bed and onto the floor, while simultaneously hearing a hard thump on the bathroom basin. Maud cried out.
Oh, me bloody head! Oh, shit! What just hit me bloody head? Fuck yeah!
Basil burst out laughing. He couldn't help it, but he did feel sorry for his best friend. Maud eventually stumbled out of the bathroom and staggered back up onto his bunk bed.
Oh, fuck. Now I've got a bloody sick head.
He bellowed in a foul mood, wiping his face with his singlet.
Yeah, well, we've all known that for a long time.
Muttered Basil, finding it hard to control his laughter.
Oh, so funny, isn't it? You try hitting your head on the damn hand basin. See if you'd be laughing then, you sod.
It wasn't long before the smell of putrid vomit wafted throughout the cabin, quickly becoming unbearable.
Oh my God, bloody hell.
Basil complained, knowing he wouldn't sleep a wink because of it. It was ghastly.
Come on. Did you not even clean it up?
I'll clean it in the morning.
Maud mumbled.
Oh, come on.
Basil protested.
Where am I going to take a leak? Overboard?
Probably.
Maud grovelled.
I can't move right now. I'm pretty sure this storm has taken us up through the gates of hell.
Flashes of lightning glinted through the porthole, illuminating the cabin as the ship succumbed to the storm's wrath. The Adriatic was approximately 1,000 nautical miles southeast of Ceylon, heading through the bottom end of the expansive Bengal Bay.
Oh, I have to get out and get some fresh air.
Basil mumbled, feeling frustrated and getting queasier by the minute.
You'll get blown off the ship.
I can't bear to smell another second of this.
Basil sputtered, slipping into his boots.
I'll come back later. I'm going out onto the deck.
Maud was so poorly that he didn't even have it in him to respond. So Basil quietly got up and wedged himself out through the cabin door and clumsily staggered down the corridor toward the deck, running into the walls and doors as the ship threw him about violently. Not a soul was in sight as he wobbled along the dimly lit ship, but oddly enough, he noticed a grubby man slouched up against the doors to the deck.
A fat old drunken sailor.
Basil snickered to himself. The old man's snoring alone was almost as loud as the fury outside, the closer Basil drew to him. Gripping onto the wall railing, Basil suddenly shuddered and chills ran down his spine. He stopped in his tracks as his mind flashed back to the drunken man who was staggering outside his study at the East Docks. That strange night he saw the Black Shadow last winter.
And his hat was made of good cream cheese and his name was Aiken Drum.
No, Basil gasped, instantly dismissing it with a smirk.
Can't be. My mind's playing tricks on me.
Basil continued on, suspiciously watching the snoring man, until he stood a couple of feet in front of him, observing his grunts and groans, and getting a whiff of the stale, alcoholic stench hovering around him.
And I thought Maud was a drunk. Too much to drink, old mate.
Basil muttered, slowly walking past him. Despite the old man's scruffy and very unkempt appearance, Basil noticed a remarkable golden ring with a peculiar black stone on the man's pinky finger. Curious, Basil squatted down to take a closer glimpse. Suddenly, the old man's eyes opened wide.
Not enough to drink, young chap.
The robust man blurted out boldly. Basil jumped with fright and lost his balance, stumbling backward down the corridor. He quickly stood up, trying to conceal his embarrassment.
Don't you have a cabin?
Basil asked, brushing himself off. The old man pulled a silver flask out of his hole-infested blazer pocket and took a swig.
A cabin is no desire of mine.
The old man answered in a raspy tone.
I'd rather be feeling the heartbeat of the sea. Feel her now. I'm feeling her too much.
Basil murmured, glancing into the dark eyes of this intriguing man, making him ever so more inquisitive.
What are you doing out here, then? You're too young to fathom it, young lad.
The drunken man blatantly replied, leaning up against the exit doors as the ship veered sharply to the right. Slightly offended, Basil raised his eyebrows.
Oh, too young?
He retorted, knowing how mature he was for a 19-year-old.
I doubt that very much, sir.
He had swiftly grown tired of the drunken man's groveling and turned on his heel to go out onto the deck.
You be bold to be going out there, young lad.
The old man said over his shoulder. Basil stopped mid-stride just before he pushed open the door. He thought for a moment and then spun around and glanced at the old man.
I'm not afraid of a little wind and rain,
he muttered.
Oh, but that's not there what I'm talking about. Whatever.
Basil rolled his eyes, shaking his head. He pushed open the doors and was greeted by the wrath of the storm as he stepped outside. Dismissing the encounter quickly, Basil inhaled the violent winds of salty air hitting him on the face. It was definitely scarier outside, watching the thick black thunderclouds rolling by him, but not enough to make him go back inside. Holding on to the ship's railing tightly, he fought the gusts of wind and sea spray and slowly made his way toward the back of the ship, drenched in razor-sharp rain.
Definitely at the gates of hell,
he thought quickly, but anything had to be better than a vomit-smelling cabin with a best friend moaning and groaning. The ship violently sliced through the warm, swelling waters, and at last, Basil made it to the back of the ship, where it seemed to be sheltered from the splintering rain and crosswinds. He sat down and held onto the bench, watching the enormous rogue waves rolling in and smashing into the hull, hoping that the raging storm would calm down and eventually pass, but it just seemed to be getting worse and worse. The aggressive flapping of a flag above his head caught his attention, and he was just waiting for it to be torn away from its pole. He glanced back out into the angry darkness and and suddenly felt his heart beginning to wildly thump in his chest. He let out a gasp, clutching his heart, wondering what was going on. Something wasn't right, and he felt it so. He started getting nervous, and out of nowhere, the medallion around his neck began twitching. His breath caught in his throat, and he squinted down at it, bewildered. Gripping his soggy hand around it, he felt a slight pulsation growing by the second. He knew something was going on, and his uneasiness was getting the better of him. He decided reluctantly that he would put up with the smell of Maud's vomit and head back inside to the cabin. But as he stood to his feet, he felt dizzy and almost headbutted the flagpole.
Oh, shit!
He gripped onto it tightly, staggering for the handrail. 3 bolts of lightning, all with immaculate timing, hit the surface of the swelling seawater in front of Basil's very eyes. Their vicious electric veins exploded into 1,000 different directions within the excitable air, and one of them reached out and hit the medallion around Basil's neck. At that very instant, the life force within him was immediately sucked from his body, replacing it with a searing fire, burning every minute fiber within his being. He found himself paralyzed, suspended within 1 billion volts of electricity, his boots welded to the deck of the ship as the current of God charred the darkest parts of his soul. But oddly enough, he was still fully conscious and very aware of everything unfolding.
Holy God! Am I dead?
He wondered.
I must be. I can't survive something like this.
Even more staggering was those remarkable lightning bolts still lingering within the salty air, bonding with both the water and Basil in a spectacular show of circuitry. Basil was convinced he had died, because he knew to experience this was absolutely impossible. And just when he thought he couldn't bear another second of extraordinary pain tearing through his body, suddenly the lightning and all surrounding sound had diminished, replaced with a glowing haze forming in the air above the silent waves in front of him. Gratitude washed over him as he felt a fresh burst of oxygen flush throughout his lungs, and he regained body movement, much to his relief. He gasped, holding his hands up to his neck, hyperventilating.
Oh God! Oh God!
Oddly enough, he noticed, much to his surprise, that he wasn't getting wet, even though he could see that all around him. The rain thrashed through the air. It was as if he was invisibly shielded from any elemental occurrences. There was a strange, gentle wind enveloping him. As if all of this wasn't enough already, the glowing haze, hovering over the angry seas, began moving within several feet of him at the edge of the ship's deck. It began to twist and shimmer, and out of nowhere, an apparition began to manifest in front of Basil's very stunned eyes.
I must be dead,
he whispered in awe.
This is ridiculous.
Eventually, the shimmering apparition melted into an incredibly beautiful woman, unlike anyone Basil had ever seen in his entire life. Draped in a long golden robe, the woman stared at Basil, void of emotion, with her knee-length chestnut hair flailing within the gentle winds that danced around them both. There was no word that could describe the beauty of this woman. In all of his life, Basil had never been struck so deeply by such devastating radiance. It was so powerful, so impervious, that he was utterly lost for words and dropped to his knees, succumbing to her majesty. The extraordinary brilliance that emanated from this mysterious woman ripped open Basil's heart, flooding it with the kind of love that would smolder even the sun itself. The woman began to move toward him, but the closer she drew, the more disorientated he felt, and his vision became blurred. He rubbed his eyes. "Touch the medallion." A soft, soothing voice popped into his head. Obeying without question, Basil touched the vibrating medallion around his neck, and incredibly, his blurred vision now became crystal clear. "Stand before me," the woman uttered, extending her delicate arm to aid Basil to his feet. As soon as he touched her hand, a million images flashed through his mind like a movie.
Jesus Christ.
Basil whispered, standing up, seeing the incandescent radiance of the woman's glassy violet eyes, so endless, so forever, that his body violently trembled out of control. He had never felt more vulnerable than what he did now. He studied her flawless face, searching for answers.
Who are you?
Not a moment later, it was as if he had been hit with an epiphany, and her face immediately became familiar.
I know you!
He gasped, shocked even by his own testament. Salty tears welled up in his disbelieving eyes.
This is crazy! Forgive me! I don't know what's going on. I feel so weird, but I feel like I know you.
The serene woman's porcelain face became full of emotion, and glassy tears welled up in the corners of her eyes. Yes. She nodded, her soft lips delicately trembling.
Am I dead?
Basil muttered with pleading eyes, desperate for answers. The woman kindly smiled, shaking her head. No, she whispered.
Are you an angel?
She shook her head. Basil was totally overwhelmed.
This is impossible.
He stammered.
I must be dreaming. I must be.
The woman, with her glittering robe flowing behind her, moved within a foot of Basil, and he felt himself falling into the eternalness of her thoughtful, warm eyes. No, she soothed. Not impossible. It is the undeniable truth. Amazingly, she leaned in and kissed him, her soft, pillowy lips so tenderly melting into his. Basil felt a surge of unbelievable energy singe through his body, so wildly powerful that his eyes rolled into the back of his head, and he immediately blacked out, dropping to the deck of the ship, totally unconscious.